The rain poured softly over the cemetery as black umbrellas opened like dark flowers across the rows of mourners. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of the priest's voice and the whisper of the wind brushing against polished marble. It was the funeral of Eleanor Sterling, the billionaire whose name carried power in every corner of the city. Her empire had built skylines, employed thousands, and donated millions. Yet, for all her wealth, her passing felt strangely quiet, as though the world itself couldn't quite believe she was gone. Cameras flashed at the edges of the ceremony, reporters murmuring behind umbrellas, desperate to capture a glimpse of her only son, Nathan Sterling. He stood beside the casket with a blank expression, his hands clasped tightly, his jaw firm, as if holding back emotions that refused to surface. Everyone had a story about Eleanor, the visionary, the perfectionist, the woman who rose from nothing, but no one really knew her. Even her son, now surrounded by business partners and lawyers, seemed like a stranger in the middle of his mother's farewell. The priest's words floated through the damp air. We gather here to honor a life of strength, brilliance, and generosity. But they felt hollow, rehearsed, almost empty. Then, as if the earth itself exhaled, the heavy cemetery gates creaked open. Every head turned. Through the mist and rain, a frail figure appeared, a woman in soaked, torn clothes, clutching a small plastic bag to her chest. Her hair was tangled, her shoes mismatched, and her steps unsteady. The guards at the entrance hesitated, unsure whether to stop her or help her. She moved forward, slow but determined, her eyes locked on the casket. The whispers began immediately. Who is she? Is she lost? Get her out of here. But she didn't stop. The closer she came, the more people noticed the intensity in her gaze. When she finally reached the front row, she paused, trembling under the weight of the stairs. Rain dripped from her face as she whispered something almost too soft to hear. Nathan glanced at her, frowning. "I'm sorry, ma'am," said one of the ushers, stepping closer. But before he could lead her away, she lifted her head and spoke louder, her voice breaking through the hush like thunder. "She's not dead," she said. For a moment, no one moved. The priest froze mid-prayer, and the guests exchanged uneasy looks. "What did she say?" someone muttered. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Eleanor Sterling. She's not dead." The crowd erupted in disbelief. A few people laughed nervously, thinking she was mad. Others looked horrified that such a scene was unfolding at the funeral of one of the richest women in the world. Nathan took a step toward her, his face pale. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. But the woman didn't answer. She clutched her bag tighter, rainwater pooling at her feet, and repeated softly, "You buried the wrong truth." Security began to approach, but Nathan lifted a hand to stop them. Something about her voice, shaky, desperate, yet certain, made him hesitate. The whispers around them faded as everyone watched her in stunned silence. Lightning flashed above the graves, and in that flicker of light, the billionaire's son realized that this was no random outburst from a stranger. The homeless woman standing before him knew something no one else in that crowd dared to imagine. The funeral that had begun with dignity had suddenly turned into a mystery, and with one trembling sentence, the world of the living and the dead had begun to blur. The sound of the woman's trembling voice echoed through the cold, wet air, cutting straight through the steady rhythm of the rain. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if time itself had stopped around that casket. Then the murmurs began again, louder this time, mixing shock, confusion, and judgment into a storm of whispers. "She's insane," someone muttered under their breath. "Get her out of here," another voice snapped. Two security guards stepped forward, their black coats dripping with rain, reaching for her arms. But the woman stepped back, clutching her chest as if guarding something precious. Her clothes clung to her thin frame, and her voice broke as she shouted, "Listen to me. Eleanor isn't gone. I saw her. She's alive." A wave of gasps rippled through the mourners, followed by uneasy laughter. It was the kind of laugh people used when they didn't know what else to do. The priest frowned deeply, closing his prayer book. "Madam, please," he said in a controlled tone. "This is a sacred place." But she shook her head violently, her eyes wide and full of tears. "You don't understand," she cried. "She's alive. You're burying a lie." The rain seemed to grow heavier, drumming on the umbrellas and the polished casket, like nature itself was holding its breath. Nathan Sterling stood frozen beside his mother's coffin, his heart thudding painfully in his chest. He had spent the entire week avoiding emotions, numbing himself with paperwork, condolences, and the sound of people's empty sympathies. But now, staring at this woman, this stranger, he felt something stir. Her voice, though rough and tired, carried a strange familiarity, something that tugged at a buried memory. The guards tried again to pull her away, but Nathan suddenly raised his hand. "Wait," he said quietly, and everyone turned toward him. The homeless woman's chest rose and fell with quick breaths. Her soaked hair clung to her face, but her eyes, deep, determined, and sorrowful, locked onto his. "How do you know my mother?" Nathan asked, his voice trembling slightly. For a moment, she didn't answer. The tension in the air was thick enough to feel. Then, slowly, she whispered, "Because she saved me once." The crowd went still again. The guards froze, looking to Nathan for direction. The woman's voice cracked as she continued, "Years ago, when I had nothing, no home, no hope, she gave me food. She sat with me, talked to me like I mattered." Her eyes glistened under the gray sky. She wasn't just kind, she was scared. She told me she didn't trust the people around her. That one day, someone might try to silence her. Her words hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds above them. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to dismiss her, to tell her she was mistaken, but something deep inside wouldn't let him. His mother had always been cautious, secretive even, especially in her final months. She'd grown distant, paranoid about her business partners, and then suddenly, she was gone. The woman took one step closer, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered. "She helped me when the world had forgotten me. Now I'm trying to help her." No one spoke. Even the sound of the rain seemed to fade. Nathan stared at her, torn between disbelief and a growing sense of dread. Every instinct told him this was madness, yet his heart whispered that she might be telling the truth. For the first time since his mother's death, the certainty he had clung to began to crack, and as thunder rolled in the distance, he realized that this stranger's outburst might not be an interruption at all, but the beginning of something he was never meant to uncover. Nathan could still hear the whispers of the crowd behind him as he led the woman away from the graveyard, his shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. The rain had softened to a drizzle now, but the tension in his chest only grew heavier. The woman's clothes clung to her thin frame, her steps unsteady, yet her gaze stayed firm. Once they were far enough from the curious stares and the murmured disbelief of the mourners, she spoke. "My name is Marla," she said quietly, her voice rough but steady. "I didn't mean to interrupt, but you needed to know." Nathan crossed his arms, half defensive, half afraid. "Know what?" he asked cautiously. Marla hesitated, her eyes lowering to the muddy ground. "That your mother, Eleanor Sterling, wasn't just the woman people saw in magazines or board meetings. She was someone who came to places people like her were never supposed to. She helped us, the forgotten ones." Her words came slowly, as if pulling memories from a deep well. "She used to come to the shelter on 9th Street every month, wearing an old coat and no jewelry. No one knew who she was at first. She'd serve food, sit with us, ask questions about our lives. Not out of pity, but because she cared, really cared." Nathan frowned, confusion mixing with disbelief. "My mother? The Eleanor Sterling?" It sounded absurd. The woman he knew had been disciplined, distant, always perfectly composed, the kind of person who seemed too busy to be human. Marla nodded. She told me once that she didn't like the walls her money built around her. She said she felt trapped in a world where no one spoke the truth to her anymore. She looked up at Nathan then, her tired eyes filled with something between sorrow and urgency. But she was scared too. I remember one night, she stayed longer than usual. It was late, and everyone else had gone. She told me she didn't trust the people closest to her, that there were people waiting for her to slip, to take everything from her. Nathan's breath caught. A chill crept down his spine, sharper than the cold rain. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Marla stepped closer, her tone trembling but sincere. "Because before she left that night, she told me something strange. She said, if something ever happens to me, find my son. Tell him to look deeper and to not believe what he sees." Nathan froze. Those words sank into him like a stone sinking in water, rippling through every thought he'd buried since her death. The official report had said it was a heart attack, sudden, natural, unquestioned. He had never doubted it. But now, standing in the rain with this stranger, every certainty he had began to crumble. "You're saying someone did this to her?" he whispered, almost afraid to speak it aloud. Marla's lips trembled. "I don't know. But I know she didn't trust her world anymore. And now, seeing how quickly they buried her, how fast everyone moved on, I couldn't stay quiet." Nathan looked down, his reflection rippling in the puddle by his feet. His mind raced. The sudden funeral arrangements, the way her will had been handled by distant lawyers, the cold efficiency of it all. It all made too much sense now, and none at all. When he looked back up, Marla's face was calm, but her eyes told him she had said everything she could. "I owed her my life," she whispered. "Now maybe I've repaid a piece of that debt." Nathan stood there, silent and shaken, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. For the first time, he didn't feel grief, he felt suspicion. And deep inside, a spark of determination lit within him, whatever truth his mother had wanted him to find. He was going to uncover it, no matter the cost. Nathan couldn't sleep that night. The storm outside had faded, but inside his mind, it was just beginning. Marla's trembling words replayed again and again. "She's not dead. Look deeper." At first, he had dismissed it as impossible, the ramblings of a woman lost to grief or madness. But something about her eyes, the honesty in her voice, refused to leave him. It clung to him like the lingering scent of rain. By midnight, he found himself sitting in his home office, staring at the glowing computer screen as the wind rattled the windows. He opened his mother's medical report, the one he had never read in full. It was supposed to bring closure, but instead, it opened doors he didn't know existed. The report stated Eleanor had suffered a sudden heart attack in her study, declared dead at the scene, then taken directly to the hospital. But as Nathan read deeper, he noticed small inconsistencies. The time of death listed differently in two places, a missing physician's signature, and the absence of her autopsy results. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He had trusted the company lawyers, the doctors, everyone who had handled the arrangements. But now, it all looked too clean, too perfect. His mother's death, once an accepted tragedy, was starting to look like a cover dash-up. He called the hospital immediately, demanding to speak to the attending doctor. The receptionist hesitated before saying, "I'm sorry. Sir, Dr. Warren hasn't worked here since the day after your mother's passing." The line went dead before he could ask more. Nathan's pulse quickened. He turned to the security logs from his mother's mansion, something he had access to as her legal heir. The footage from the night she died was mostly intact, but one file, a crucial hour, was missing. Deleted. When he cross-checked the deletion time, it matched exactly with the window listed for her death. His mouth went dry. No, he whispered to himself. This wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. The next call he made was to the morgue. His voice shook as he introduced himself. "This is Nathan Sterling. I need to confirm the body identification records for Eleanor Sterling." There was a pause on the other end. The sound of papers shuffling, then a low, uncertain voice replied, "Sir, according to our records." Mrs. Sterling's body was transferred to a private facility before the formal identification process was completed. Nathan froze. Transferred. By whom? He demanded. The clerk hesitated again. It was authorized by the Sterling Foundation's legal division. Nathan slammed the phone down, his heart pounding in disbelief. The same advisors who now controlled the company, the ones who had rushed the funeral, handled the paperwork, and insisted everything was under control, were the last people to see his mother alive. He sank back into his chair, his mind spinning. Pieces began to connect. The sudden decline in his mother's health that no one could explain. Her distant behavior in the final weeks, her whisper to him during their last dinner, "Never let them own you, Nathan." Back then, he thought she meant business rivals. Now he realized she was warning him. He opened the financial records next, noticing massive transfers from her personal accounts just days before her death. Funds had vanished into offshore holdings under shell companies, all connected to her advisors. A chill spread through his veins. "It's all fake," he whispered, staring at the rain-streaked window. Marla had been right all along. His mother's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a theft. Her fortune, her legacy, even her life had been hijacked by the very people she trusted most. As the first light of dawn touched the city skyline, Nathan stood by the window, his reflection pale and hollow. He realized this was no longer about grief, it was about truth. If his mother was alive somewhere, hidden or forced into silence, he would find her. And if she wasn't, he would expose every lie built in her name. Either way, the game had changed. The son of Eleanor Sterling was done mourning now. He was hunting. For weeks, Nathan lived with nothing but the fire of truth and the faint hope that his mother was still out there somewhere. The documents, the missing records, and Marla's story had all pointed toward one thing. Eleanor Sterling hadn't died. She had been hidden. Every lead felt like a dead end, until he found a small note among her old belongings, a handwritten address with faded ink. It was located far from the city, deep in the countryside, in a place no one would ever look for a billionaire. Something inside him told him that this was it. Without waiting another day, he drove 4 hours through winding rain-soaked roads, his heart pounding harder the closer he got. The path ended at a small, secluded clinic surrounded by tall oak trees, and silence so deep it felt sacred. There was no grand sign, no trace of luxury, just an old gate and a single light flickering in the window. When he walked in, the nurse at the counter froze at the mention of his name. Her expression shifted between fear and pity. "Room 9, she whispered, as if saying more might endanger her. Nathan's legs felt weak as he moved down the narrow hallway, each step heavier than the last. His breath caught when he saw the door slightly open, a soft beeping sound escaping from within. He pushed it gently, and the sight before him stopped his heart. There, lying on a hospital bed, frail but alive, was his mother. Her silver hair spread across the pillow, her skin pale but her chest rising steadily with each breath. For a long moment, he couldn't move. He simply stood there, tears welling in his eyes, afraid it was another illusion. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Eleanor's eyelids fluttered open, and her gaze met his. For a heartbeat, confusion clouded her expression, then it melted into recognition. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Nathan," she breathed, her voice weak but full of emotion. He rushed to her side, falling to his knees as tears spilled freely down his face. He took her trembling hand in his, pressing it to his forehead. "I thought I lost you," he said through choked sobs. Eleanor smiled faintly, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "You almost did," she whispered, but someone wouldn't let me go. At that moment, the door creaked open behind him, and Marla stepped in. She looked almost the same, weary, humble, her clothes worn, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. Eleanor turned her head toward her, a soft warmth in her voice. "I told her you'd come," she murmured. Nathan looked between them, realization dawning. Marla had saved her, not just by warning him, but by rescuing her from the very people who tried to erase her. Eleanor had been hidden in the clinic under a false name, kept safe until the truth could come to light. Nathan rose to his feet and walked to Marla, his voice trembling. "You saved her life," he said. "No," Marla replied, shaking her head. "She saved mine first. I only returned the kindness." The three of them sat together in the soft light of the small room. No wealth, no cameras, no judgment, just human hearts connected by grace. When the world finally learned the story, it wasn't a headline about scandal or power. It was a story of redemption, of a homeless woman who risked everything to protect the only person who had once seen her humanity. Eleanor Sterling's company would later rebuild stronger than ever. But her legacy wasn't money anymore, it was compassion. And as for Nathan, he would never forget that day, the day his mother came back to him, the day a stranger became family, and the day he finally understood that kindness, no matter how small, always finds its way home.